"Don't let me die," the chained Apache warrior who offered her body and chose freedom. The sun had just begun to rise over the vast, rugged lands of the Apache territory, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber. Among the towering cliffs and winding trails, a young Apache woman moved silently, her footsteps light and careful. Her name was Nayeli, and though she was young, her spirit had already been hardened by years of watching her people fight for survival. From a very early age, she had trained to be a warrior, learning the ways of the land, the art of tracking, and the skill of defending her people. She carried herself with quiet pride, a sense of purpose in every movement, and a sharpness in her gaze that reflected a life full of lessons learned the hard way. Nayeli's tribe had always faced threats. Outsiders had long coveted their land, their freedom, and their way of life. Stories of raids and battles had been told around fires for generations, and she had listened to each tale with a mix of fear and determination. Every time she heard of a family lost or a village attacked, she had promised herself that she would never allow herself to be powerless. That promise had shaped her into the strong, alert, and cautious young woman she had become. On this particular morning, Nayeli was on the outskirts of her village, scouting for signs of movement. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of pine and earth. Birds began their morning songs, filling the silence with life. Yet beneath the beauty of the morning there was an unease she could not shake. Her instincts, honed over years of survival, whispered a warning. Something was not right. She paused, crouched behind a large boulder and scanned the horizon. At first there was nothing, just the rolling hills and the soft rustle of the wind through the grass. But then she saw it, a distant cloud of dust, moving too quickly and too purposefully to be a herd of animals. Nayeli's heart tightened. Soldiers. Outsiders, heavily armed and moving fast toward her village. She could sense the danger instantly, the threat to her people. She had faced soldiers before, and she knew how deadly they could be. Without hesitation, Nayeli sprinted back to the village, her movements swift and silent. She had to warn her family, her people, before it was too late. Her mind raced as she ran, thinking of every possible way to protect them, every strategy she had learned. She reached the village and burst into the main square, shouting warnings. The elders and warriors scrambled, grabbing weapons and preparing for the worst. Nayeli could see the fear in their eyes, mirrored by her own. But before they could organize a defense, the soldiers were upon them. They moved like a storm, fast and merciless. Nayeli fought alongside her people, using every skill she had learned. She ran through the chaos, dodging arrows and strikes, countering when she could, but she knew it was a losing battle. They were too many, too strong, and too determined to capture rather than kill. In the middle of the struggle, Nayeli found herself separated from her family. She ducked behind a fallen tree, catching her breath, heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, desperate for a way to escape, to survive. But the soldiers were methodical, sweeping through the village, leaving no one untouched. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had trained for this moment, even if she had hoped she never would face it. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her from behind. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but it was useless. Strong arms held her firmly, and before she could react further, they had tied her hands behind her back. Nayeli's breath came in quick, sharp bursts as she realized the terrifying truth. She had been captured. The soldiers pushed her forward, their faces cold and expressionless, showing no sign of mercy. She looked around for anyone to help, anyone to fight back, but the village was already under control. As they marched her away, Nayeli's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Fear, anger, and determination battled within her. She refused to show weakness, refused to let them see her despair. Every step was a test of her endurance, every moment a battle of will. She kept her head high, even as the chains dug into her wrists, even as the rough hands forced her along. She had faced dangers before, But this was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The soldiers did not speak much, but their presence was enough to instill terror. Naeli observed them carefully, noting their movements, their patterns, the way they held their weapons. Even in captivity, she was learning, planning, and looking for an opportunity to turn the situation in her favor. She reminded herself of the stories her grandmother had told her, stories of brave warriors who had faced impossible odds and survived. She drew strength from those tales, from the knowledge that she was not powerless, even in chains. Hours passed as they walked her through unfamiliar terrain. The landscape changed from dusty plains to rocky hills, each step more exhausting than the last. Naeli's muscles ached, but her mind remained sharp. She studied every detail, memorizing paths, noting every potential hiding place or escape route. Her spirit refused to break, and she silently vowed that she would find a way out. She had to. Freedom was everything. As night fell, they reached a small encampment. Naeli was thrown roughly to the ground and chained to a wooden post. She looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling above her, a stark contrast to the darkness she felt inside. She thought of her family, of her village, and of everything she loved. The thought of never seeing them again made her chest ache, but it also fueled a fierce determination. She would survive. She had to survive. The soldiers left her with minimal provisions, confident in their control over her. But Naeli knew better. She had been trained to endure, to think, and to act when the moment was right. Even in chains, she began to plan, considering every possible way to escape. She counted the guards, watched their routines, and tested the strength of her restraints whenever she could. She knew that survival required patience, cunning, and courage, and she had all three in abundance. Lying on the cold ground that night, Naeli allowed herself a moment of reflection. She remembered the laughter of children in her village, the warmth of her mother's embrace, and the proud gaze of her father as he taught her to wield a bow. Those memories strengthened her resolve. She whispered quietly to herself, a promise and a warning: "I will not die here. I will not be broken. I will find my freedom." As the wind whispered through the camp, Naeli closed her eyes, not in surrender but in quiet determination. She would survive this ordeal not just for herself, but for her people, for the life she had fought so hard to protect. The chains that bound her body could not touch her spirit. Her story, she knew, was only beginning, and she was determined to write the next chapters on her own terms. The night was deep and quiet, with only the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional distant howl of a coyote breaking the silence. Naeli lay chained to the wooden post, her wrists sore and bruised from the tight ropes. She could feel every ache in her body, yet she refused to give in to despair. Her mind was racing, turning over every possible plan, every opportunity to escape. She knew that surviving this ordeal would require more than strength. It would require courage, cleverness, and patience beyond anything she had ever imagined. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow on the encampment, Naeli observed her captors carefully. They moved with routine precision, their eyes never lingering too long on her. They underestimated her. They assumed that fear and chains had stripped her of power. But Naeli had learned long ago that the mind could be stronger than the body. Even now, she held on to that truth like a lifeline. The soldiers spoke little, and their words were often harsh and commanding when they did. They brought her food and water, placing it on the ground just out of her reach, as if testing her obedience. She accepted it silently, keeping her gaze steady, her spirit unbroken. She had learned that outward compliance could mask inward defiance. Every meal was an opportunity to observe, to note the number of guards, their rotations, and their weaknesses. Even in captivity, Naeli was learning. Days passed, blending into nights, each one testing her endurance. Hunger gnawed at her and exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but her mind remained sharp. She remembered her training, A true warrior does not surrender, even when the world seems to collapse around them. Nayeli began to experiment with the ropes that bound her. She flexed her wrists, twisted her arms, and discovered that with careful effort, she could loosen them ever so slightly. It was a small victory, but it filled her with hope. Her captors, however, were relentless. They began to demand obedience in more cruel ways. They mocked her, tried to intimidate her, and threatened consequences she could not ignore. One day, they told her that she would have to comply with their demands or risk losing her life. Nayeli felt a wave of fear, one that made her pulse quicken and her stomach tighten. The words were cruel, cruel enough to strip away the calm she had maintained for days. She understood clearly what they wanted, and the thought made her stomach churn. Yet Nayeli's spirit refused to break. She could not, would not, let them see her despair. She knew that even in the face of such fear, she had to remain alert. Her mind became a battlefield, weighing the unthinkable options laid before her. She considered her choices carefully, understanding that survival often meant making decisions that no one could fully understand. For now, she played along, giving the soldiers the appearance of compliance while keeping every thought and every plan hidden. As the days stretched on, she began to notice small changes in the guards' behavior. Some of them were careless, leaving doors unlocked or turning their backs for a moment too long. Others whispered among themselves, revealing fragments of information about their plans. Nayeli absorbed every detail, her mind weaving them together like a tapestry. She began to understand the rhythm of their lives, the patterns that could lead to her freedom if only she could act at the right moment. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of red and orange, Nayeli allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about her village, the rolling hills, the warmth of the fires at night, and the laughter of children running through the dust. Her heart ached for those memories, but they also fueled her determination. She had survived battles before, faced danger head-on, and yet never had she been in a situation so threatening. She whispered to herself, "I will not die here, I will survive." Over time, Nayeli discovered that the soldiers had weaknesses beyond their routines. Some were arrogant, believing that they were untouchable. Others were careless, leaving keys or weapons unattended for just a moment. She took mental notes of everything, planning for a future moment when she could seize control of her fate. Each observation, each detail became a small piece of her strategy. She was not powerless, even in chains. Every day she grew stronger in her mind, if not yet in her body. There came a day when the soldiers brought other prisoners into the camp. Nayeli observed them closely, seeing the fear and despair in their eyes. Some surrendered completely, while others clung to defiance. Watching them, she realized that her spirit was different. She had refused to give in completely, refused to let fear control her decisions. This realization gave her hope, hope that no matter how dire her situation seemed, she could still find a way to freedom. As the weeks passed, Nayeli began to test the limits of her restraints. She discovered that by subtly shifting her weight and twisting her wrists at precise angles, she could slowly loosen the ropes. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and concentration, but it was progress. Each small movement gave her a sense of agency, a reminder that she was not completely at the mercy of her captors. Her heart swelled with quiet determination. One night, as she lay under the stars, she considered the unthinkable choices that had been forced upon her. She had been offered a way to survive through submission, a choice that went against every instinct, every principle she held dear. Nayeli's mind wrestled with fear, morality, and survival. Could she endure what they demanded? Could she maintain her dignity while doing what was necessary to live? These were questions she did not answer lightly. She sat in silence, letting the night wind carry her thoughts. Despite the gravity of her situation, Nayeli refused to succumb to despair. She reminded herself that every warrior had faced moments of extreme challenge, and the true test was how they responded. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She repeated these words in her mind over and over, using them as a shield against hopelessness. Every day she survived was a day closer to freedom, a day that strengthened her resolve. Eventually, Nayeli recognized that surviving her captivity would require more than patience. It would require strategy. She began to form a plan, considering every detail she had observed. The guards' routines, the weaknesses she had discovered, the layout of the camp, all of it became part of a mental map she studied tirelessly. She envisioned herself moving silently through the shadows, slipping past the soldiers, and reclaiming the freedom that had been stolen from her. Even as fear lingered in the corners of her mind, Nayeli felt a growing sense of empowerment. She had endured pain, hunger, and threats, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She understood that survival was not about surrender but about resilience, about finding a path forward when all others seemed blocked. In those moments, chained under the cold night sky, Nayeli became more than a captive. She became a strategist, a thinker, and a warrior of the mind as well as the body. She also began to recognize small acts of defiance that kept her sense of self intact. Subtle gestures, maintaining eye contact with the guards, even small acts of independence, became symbols of her unbroken spirit. Each day she survived, she grew more confident in her ability to take control of her destiny. The chains that bound her body could not bind her mind. As the days blurred into nights, Nayeli realized that the time to act would come soon. Her observations had given her a plan, a path that could lead to freedom if executed with precision and courage. She knew that hesitation could mean death, but careful preparation could mean survival. She steeled herself for the challenge ahead, knowing that the moment of decision would test every ounce of her strength and wisdom. In the quiet moments before dawn, Nayeli whispered a promise to herself. She would not allow fear or despair to dictate her life. She would endure, she would resist, and she would escape. Freedom was not just a word, it was a goal, a necessity, a part of her very being. And she would claim it no matter the cost. Days had turned into weeks, and yet Nayeli remained vigilant. Every sunrise brought with it the same chains, the same guards, and the same cold uncertainty. But unlike before, she no longer felt entirely trapped by fear. Each day of observation, each quiet moment of reflection, had begun to shape her mind into something sharper, more cunning. She studied the guards with an intensity born of necessity, noting the small habits and weaknesses that most would have ignored. She saw which guard favored the same side of the camp, who would glance over at the fire a little too long, who spoke in whispers revealing information he did not realize he had shared. It was during one of these quiet observations that Nayeli first truly began to feel the spark of possibility. She had noticed that a young soldier, barely more than a boy, had a tendency to fall asleep at his post in the late hours of the night. Another guard, older and slower, would sometimes leave the central gate unlatched for a few moments while attending to menial tasks. These small cracks in the soldier's discipline became the foundation of Nayeli's plan. She realized that freedom would not come from brute force, but from patience, timing, and the clever use of opportunities. Nayeli spent long hours imagining herself moving silently through the camp, slipping past guards and disappearing into the wilderness. She pictured every detail, the sound of her feet against the ground, the rustle of leaves, the shadows that would hide her movements. Her imagination became a rehearsal for what was to come, sharpening her mind for the precise moment when she would act. She understood that one wrong move could cost her life, and she accepted that danger would be an inseparable part of her plan. The days grew hotter, and the sun beat down relentlessly on the camp. The ropes around her wrists had loosened slightly from her careful manipulations, and she could now flex her fingers just enough to test the limits of her restraints. It was painstaking work, requiring patience, attention, and careful measurement of the guards' reactions. Naomi took pride in these small victories, knowing that each one brought her closer to the moment when she could finally claim her freedom. One evening, after the guards had completed their evening routines, Naomi noticed something that would become a turning point in her plan. A gap had formed in the chain of posts where she was held, a space between two trees where the guards' patrols rarely passed. It was narrow, barely enough for her to squeeze through, but it was a crack in the otherwise unyielding wall of her captivity. Her heart raced at the thought, but she calmed herself with a steadying breath. Patience would be as important now as courage. She knew that the opportunity was fleeting and that acting too soon would be fatal. Over the following days, Naomi began to test her escape mentally, visualizing the exact sequence of actions she would need to take. She imagined twisting her wrists at the right angle, slipping through the chains, moving silently across the uneven ground, and reaching the small gap between the trees. She thought about the timing of the guards' patrols, the sounds that could betray her, and the terrain that would both aid and challenge her. Every detail mattered. Every movement had to be perfect. She also began to consider what lay beyond the camp. The wilderness stretched out in every direction, filled with the same harsh beauty that she had known all her life. Rocky cliffs, dense forests, and winding trails were both obstacles and allies. Naomi knew the land intimately, having grown up learning its secrets. She understood where water could be found, where animals hid, and which paths were safest to travel. This knowledge became her lifeline, giving her confidence that even if she escaped, she could survive. Despite the meticulous planning, fear remained a constant companion. Naomi knew that one misstep could lead to recapture or death. She reminded herself constantly of the stakes. The freedom she sought was not only for herself, but for the memory of her people, for the life she had fought to protect. She imagined the joy of running through the hills again, the relief of breathing air untainted by the presence of chains, the pride of reclaiming the life that had been taken from her. These visions strengthened her resolve. One particularly quiet night, Naomi made her first real test. She shifted her weight slowly, twisting her wrists against the ropes with precise pressure. She listened intently, waiting for the guards to remain distracted. Her heart pounded in her chest as the ropes gave just enough to allow her a little more movement. It was not escape yet, but it was proof that her efforts were not in vain. A flicker of hope ignited within her, bright and steady, guiding her determination. The next few days were a careful balance of observation and preparation. Naomi began to move subtly within the bounds of her chains, strengthening her muscles and testing the limits of her physical endurance. She learned the rhythm of the guards' patrols with exacting precision, noting every irregularity that could serve as an advantage. Patience became her greatest weapon, and she honed it with relentless discipline. She had learned that freedom was not simply a goal, but a careful calculation, a reward for those willing to endure, to plan, and to act at the perfect moment. Finally, the opportunity she had envisioned for so long arrived. One of the guards, the young one who had been careless, had fallen asleep near her post. Another older soldier had moved to attend to some duty, leaving the narrow gap between the posts unmonitored. Naomi's heart raced, but she remained calm, her breathing steady. Every thought, every muscle, every movement had been practiced in her mind, and now the moment to act had come. She twisted her wrists carefully, slipping just enough to loosen the chains around her hands. The cold metal scraped against her skin, but she ignored the pain. Inch by inch, she maneuvered herself until she could reach the narrow gap between the trees. She held her breath as she tested the space, then shifted her body carefully, squeezing through with silent determination. The ropes threatened to catch, but with patience and precision she freed herself completely. Once free of the chains, Naomi moved cautiously but swiftly, keeping to the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every sound seemed amplified. the crack of a twig underfoot, the distant murmur of a guard's voice. Yet her mind remained clear, her training guiding her through each step. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, and now she executed it with the precision of a warrior who understood the stakes completely. The camp seemed enormous, and every step carried the weight of potential danger. Naeli kept low, moving silently through the darkness. She avoided the faint pools of light cast by the fires, stayed clear of paths the soldiers favored, and used every shadow and contour of the land to her advantage. The wilderness beyond waited for her, vast and unpredictable, but also full of the promise of freedom. As she neared the edge of the camp, Naeli paused for a moment, listening. The guards were unaware, still occupied with their routines. Relief flooded her, but she did not allow herself to relax. Every step from here on was crucial, and the wilderness would present new challenges she had to face alone. She whispered a quiet prayer to the spirits of her ancestors, asking for guidance, strength, and protection. Their presence felt close, comforting, and empowering. Finally, she reached the boundary of the camp and stepped into the open wilderness. The air felt different, cleaner, freer, and full of life. Naeli took a deep breath, letting the scent of earth and pine fill her lungs. She was free, but she knew that her journey had only begun. The wilderness was vast, full of dangers, and she had to navigate it carefully. But she also felt an exhilaration she had never known. Each step away from the camp was a step toward reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. For the first time in weeks, Naeli allowed herself a small smile. She had acted with courage, patience, and cleverness, turning observation and preparation into opportunity. She had faced fear and uncertainty, and she had prevailed. Yet she knew that freedom was not merely about escaping. It was about surviving, enduring, and moving forward with determination and skill. As the first light of dawn illuminated the horizon, Naeli moved further into the wilderness, keeping low and careful. Every rustle of leaves, every movement in the shadows, reminded her to stay alert. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but she had already proven to herself that she had the strength to face it. Each step was an affirmation of her resolve, a promise to herself that she would survive, no matter the cost. And so, with the rising sun at her back and the vast unknown stretching ahead, Naeli embarked on the next stage of her journey. She was no longer a captive but a warrior in pursuit of freedom. Her mind was sharp, her body strong, and her spirit unbroken. Every moment, every decision, and every careful step would bring her closer to the life she had been denied, and closer to the people and land she loved. Naeli was free, and for the first time in a long while the future felt possible. The wilderness stretched endlessly before Naeli, filled with both promise and peril. She moved cautiously, each step measured, aware that while she had escaped the camp, freedom was far from guaranteed. Her body ached from weeks of confinement, her wrists were still tender from the ropes, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her muscles. Yet her spirit was stronger than ever. Every step into the unknown was a defiance against those who had tried to break her, a testament to the courage and cunning that had carried her this far. The sun had barely risen when Naeli realized the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The terrain was rugged, steep hills, tangled forests, and hidden ravines made every movement difficult. She knew that navigating through this harsh landscape would test her endurance, her knowledge of the land, and her instinct for survival. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, reminded her that the wilderness was alive, unpredictable, and full of secrets. But Naeli had grown up in these lands. She knew its paths, its hiding spots, and its signs of danger. This knowledge would be her guide. Her first hours in freedom were quiet but tense. Naeli moved with caution, keeping to the shadows and avoiding open spaces where she might be seen. She thought constantly about the camp she had left behind, the soldiers, their routines, the moments she had observed so carefully. Each detail had become a map in her mind, guiding her path through the forest. She reminded herself that every sound, every movement could signal danger, and she remained alert, her senses sharpened to their maximum. As the morning progressed, she encountered the first real obstacle, a narrow gorge with a rushing stream at the bottom. The rocks were slick with moisture, and a misstep could mean a fall that might injure her severely or even end her journey. Nayeli paused, studying the safest path. She knew that rushing could be fatal. With careful steps, she descended slowly, testing each foothold before committing her weight. Her hands, still sore from the chains, found grips on rough stones and tree roots, guiding her descent. It took patience, skill, and nerve, but she reached the bottom safely, her heart pounding with both exertion and relief. Once across the stream, Nayeli pressed forward, moving deeper into the forest. She knew that the soldiers would soon realize her escape, and the possibility of pursuit was real. She imagined them combing the woods, calling out, searching relentlessly. Every shadow could be an enemy, every sound a warning. But she also knew that she had an advantage. They did not know the land as she did. She had lived here all her life. Every hill, every bend in the river, every hidden path was a part of her memory, and she used it to her advantage. Midday brought both heat and fatigue. Nayeli paused in the shelter of a dense thicket, taking a moment to drink from a small stream and catch her breath. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her legs ached from the climb and constant movement. Yet she refused to linger too long. Freedom required vigilance. She knew that resting too long could give her pursuers a chance to catch up, but she also understood that a moment of carelessness could end her journey. It was a delicate balance, and Nayeli managed it with precision born from experience and instinct. As she moved, she reflected on the narrow escape from the camp. The chains, the guards, the constant danger, all of it had tested her beyond anything she had known, yet she had prevailed. Her mind, trained by both necessity and intuition, had guided her through the most perilous moments. She understood now that survival was not only about escaping immediate danger, but about anticipating the next challenge, preparing for the unforeseen, and trusting in one's abilities. Her journey was not without close calls. As the afternoon sun climbed high, she heard the distant shouts of men. The soldiers were searching, moving through the trees, their voices sharp and urgent. Nayeli froze, pressing herself against the thick foliage. Her heart raced, and every nerve in her body screamed for action. Slowly, silently, she moved along the edge of the forest, keeping low and avoiding branches that might betray her presence. The soldiers passed within a few dozen feet of her, unaware that the very person they sought was mere steps away. Relief mixed with adrenaline surged through her, reminding her of the high stakes of every decision she made. Nightfall brought new challenges. Darkness offered cover, but it also hid dangers, steep cliffs, tangled roots, and the predators that prowled the forest. Nayeli moved cautiously, relying on her knowledge of the terrain and her heightened senses. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush, made her pause and assess. She had learned from the wilderness that it demanded respect, and she treated it as both ally and obstacle. The stars above guided her path, and she whispered prayers of gratitude to the spirits of her ancestors, seeking their protection and guidance. Hours into the night, she encountered a wider river, its waters rushing swiftly over rocks and fallen trees. Crossing it was dangerous, yet there was no other choice. Nayeli scanned the riverbank, searching for a safe entry point. She found a narrow section where the current seemed less fierce, with rocks that formed natural stepping stones. Carefully, she placed her feet, testing the stability of each rock before committing her weight. The cold water rushed over her legs, numbing her, but she moved steadily, balancing with a warrior's precision. Reaching the other side, she felt a surge of triumph, knowing that each obstacle she overcame brought her closer to freedom. Her journey continued into the early morning hours. Fatigue threatened to overtake her, but Naeli drew strength from the memories of her people and her home. She remembered her family, the warmth of her village, and the teachings of her elders. Each memory became fuel for her determination, a reminder of why she fought so fiercely for survival. She knew that giving up was not an option. Freedom demanded endurance, courage, and resilience, and she had all three in abundance. As dawn approached, Naeli found herself at the base of a steep ridge. Climbing it would be exhausting, yet it offered the best vantage point to survey the land and plan the next stage of her journey. She began the ascent slowly, using every muscle, every ounce of strength she had left. The rocks scraped her hands and legs, her breath came in ragged gasps, but she pressed onward. Each step was a victory, a testament to her determination and skill. Reaching the top, she paused to survey the landscape, taking in the valleys, forests, and rivers stretching before her. From this vantage point, Naeli could see the potential dangers ahead, but she also saw opportunities. She identified hidden paths that would allow her to move undetected, places to find water and shelter, and natural barriers that could slow any pursuers. Her mind worked tirelessly, planning each movement, anticipating challenges, and preparing contingencies. The wilderness was vast and unforgiving, but she had learned to navigate it with skill, patience, and awareness. Throughout the day, Naeli continued her journey, moving with careful determination. She avoided open areas, stuck to the cover of trees, and used every shadow to her advantage. Her muscles ached, her body cried out for rest, yet she pressed onward, driven by the promise of freedom. She understood that the journey was not only physical but also mental. Maintaining focus, composure, and clarity was as vital as moving quickly and silently. By evening, Naeli had reached a dense forest, its thick canopy offering both cover and challenge. The underbrush was tangled and difficult to navigate, but it concealed her from any prying eyes. She moved slowly, carefully, avoiding branches and roots that could betray her presence. Each step was deliberate, measured, and cautious. She had learned from her past experiences that survival demanded patience as much as courage. Night fell again, bringing with it the sounds of the forest, the calls of owls, the rustle of small animals, and the distant roar of predators. Naeli remained alert, every sense attuned to the environment around her. She moved silently, balancing fatigue with necessity, and relied on the knowledge and skills that had sustained her through her captivity. Every step was a blend of instinct, observation, and calculated risk. Hours later, she paused to rest in a small clearing, drinking from a hidden stream and eating what little she had managed to carry. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, thinking about how far she had come since being chained in the camp. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief, pride, and cautious hope. She had overcome every obstacle the soldiers and the wilderness had thrown at her, yet she knew the journey was not yet complete. Freedom was close, but she had to remain vigilant. As the night deepened, Naeli continued her journey, moving silently through the dense forest. Her body ached, her hands were raw from climbing and gripping, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Each step brought her closer to a new life, a life she had fought so hard to reclaim. The soldiers' camp was far behind her now, and the wilderness, once a challenge, had become her ally. She moved with confidence born of experience, determination, and skill, knowing that every careful step was bringing her closer to the home and freedom she had longed for. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, painting the landscape in soft hues of gold and orange. Naeli moved cautiously, her body exhausted but her spirit unwavering. The long, grueling nights of escape and survival had tested her in ways she had never imagined, yet she had endured. Every muscle ached, her hands bore the marks of scrapes and blisters, and fatigue threatened to weigh her down. But she knew that the hardest part was nearly behind her. Freedom was no longer an idea, it was within reach. As she navigated through the dense forest, Naeli reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought of the camp where she had been chained, the soldiers who had sought to control her, and the moments when fear had pressed down on her like a heavy stone. Those memories were painful, but they were also a testament to her resilience. She had survived not only because of her physical strength, but because of her sharp mind, her patience, and her courage. Each step forward was a triumph over every obstacle she had faced. The forest began to thin, giving way to open plains dotted with shrubs and wildflowers. The landscape was familiar, reminiscent of the rolling hills near her village. Her heart leapt with hope as she recognized the signs of her homeland. The scent of the earth, the whisper of the wind across the grass, and the distant cry of birds reminded her of the life she had left behind. She quickened her pace, careful to remain unseen, driven by the knowledge that safety and home were just beyond the horizon. Yet the journey was far from over. Naeli knew that the threat of discovery still lingered. Soldiers could be tracking her, their patrols searching relentlessly for any sign of her escape. She moved with caution, sticking to shadows, using the terrain to her advantage, and keeping a keen eye on any potential dangers. Every step required vigilance, as the freedom she had fought so hard to regain could be threatened by a single misstep. Her mind, ever alert, balanced hope with caution. As she crossed a shallow stream, she paused to drink, the cold water revitalizing her body. The stream reminded her of her village's river, where she had learned to fish and swim as a child. Memories of simpler, happier times filled her mind, giving her a sense of comfort and determination. She allowed herself a brief moment to rest, leaning against a tree and closing her eyes, letting the sounds of nature fill her senses. The gentle rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of water were a stark contrast to the harsh cries and chaos she had endured in captivity. After a short rest, Naeli pressed on, climbing a small ridge that offered a vantage point over the surrounding land. From this height she could see the valleys and forests stretching out before her, and more importantly, she could see signs of human activity, smoke rising in the distance, indicating a settlement. Hope surged through her. Perhaps there were others nearby who could provide shelter or assistance, yet she remained cautious. Approached too quickly, and she might be seen by those who did not wish her well. Moving carefully through the underbrush, Naeli made her way toward the settlement. Each step was deliberate, balancing speed with stealth. She observed the people from a distance, noting their routines and movements. They were not soldiers, and their presence seemed peaceful. Relief washed over her, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Even here, in a seemingly safe place, caution was necessary. She waited until the streets were quiet before venturing closer. Finally, she reached the edge of the settlement, hidden behind a thick line of trees and shrubs. She could see families going about their day, children playing, and traders moving through the market. The sight was both foreign and familiar, a reminder of the world she had been fighting to return to. Naeli's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and anticipation. She had survived, but she also knew that the final steps toward safety required careful navigation. She could not afford to rush or act recklessly. As she moved through the settlement cautiously, Naeli encountered a small group of people who noticed her presence. She approached slowly, keeping her hands visible to show that she meant no harm. The villagers looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern, sensing both her exhaustion and the tension that still lingered in her posture. Naeli spoke softly, explaining her situation in simple words, recounting her escape from the soldiers and her journey through the wilderness. Their expressions softened, and they offered her food, water, and a place to rest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Naeli allowed herself to relax. She sat by a fire, warming her cold hands and drinking the warm broth offered to her. The villagers listened attentively as she recounted the events that had brought her here, their eyes widening at her courage and determination. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for their kindness, realizing that her journey was not yet complete, but that she had finally reached a place of relative safety. Over the next few days, Naeli regained her strength. She explored the settlement cautiously, learning that these people were not only friendly but shared a connection to the land she loved. They taught her new ways to navigate the terrain, offered guidance for traveling safely, and provided comfort in the form of food and shelter. Naeli began to feel a sense of belonging again, a feeling she had feared lost forever. Her spirit, though tested, had emerged stronger, more resilient and wiser. Even as she recovered, Naeli reflected on the lessons she had learned throughout her ordeal. She thought of the courage required to face fear head-on, the patience needed to observe and plan, and the determination that had carried her through every challenge. She realized that freedom was not simply the absence of chains, but the ability to live with dignity, to make choices for oneself, and to protect one's spirit against all odds. Each step of her journey had reinforced these truths, shaping her into a warrior not only of the body but also of the mind and heart. Naeli also thought of her people, her family, and her village. She knew that returning home might not be immediately possible, but she carried them in her heart. Her escape was not only for herself, but for the memory of her people, for the promise of life and freedom that they had instilled in her. She whispered a quiet vow to honor them, to live fully, and to continue her journey with the strength and wisdom she had gained. As weeks passed, Naeli began to explore the surrounding wilderness once more, but now with confidence rather than fear. She moved with a heightened sense of awareness, understanding the land not just as a place to survive, but as a space that offered freedom, sustenance, and connection. She practiced her skills, refined her knowledge of the terrain, and strengthened her body and mind. Every step was a reminder of how far she had come and the resilience that had carried her through. Eventually, Naeli felt ready to take the next step, returning closer to her village. The thought filled her with both excitement and caution. She knew that the path would be dangerous, that soldiers might still patrol parts of the land, but she also knew that she had grown stronger, smarter, and more capable than she had ever been. With careful planning, observation, and patience, she could reclaim her place among her people. As she moved toward her homeland, Naeli reflected on the journey that had transformed her. The chains that had once bound her body could no longer restrain her spirit. The fear that had once pressed down on her mind had been replaced with courage, wisdom, and resilience. She had faced unimaginable challenges and had emerged not only alive but stronger, more determined, and more aware of her own power. Each scar, each bruise, each memory of struggle was a testament to her perseverance. Finally, one evening, as the sun set over the rolling hills of her homeland, Naeli caught sight of her village in the distance. Her heart leapt with joy and relief. The journey had been long, arduous, and dangerous, but she had survived. She moved cautiously, ensuring that her approach was safe. But the sight of familiar rooftops, familiar paths, and familiar faces brought tears to her eyes. She had reclaimed her freedom, and with it, a sense of peace and belonging she had feared lost forever. When she finally entered the village, Naeli was greeted by the astonished eyes of her family and friends. Their relief and joy were palpable, and Naeli felt a warmth she had longed for through her trials. She embraced them, sharing her story, and though the details were harrowing, her presence alone was proof of courage, resilience, and survival. She had not only escaped captivity but had returned stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. In the quiet moments that followed, Naeli reflected on the lessons of her journey. She realized that freedom was not simply the absence of chains but the strength to endure, the wisdom to act with patience and strategy, and the courage to reclaim one's life against all odds. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and she had emerged victorious. Her story was not only her own but a testament to the power of determination, courage, and the human spirit. As the night settled over the village, Naomi sat by the fire, her family around her, and allowed herself a moment of peace. The journey had been long and arduous, but she had survived. She had claimed her freedom, honored her people, and learned the strength that lay within her. The stars above twinkled like distant witnesses to her journey, silent yet full of recognition for the courage she had shown. Naomi knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she had proven that no chains, no matter how strong, could bind a spirit determined to be free.